Hey, everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you. Let's talk about voting rights. This is the week that we celebrate and commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March. It was three of them, actually, that gave us, or should I say, that struggle led to our gaining our voting rights, the Voting Rights Act. Actually, in 1870, we got voting rights. At least black men did. But it took 95 years and many martyrs in order for us to get that constitutional amendment enacted. We have to thank Mrs. Amelia Boynton for calling Dr. King and asking him to come to Selma. He said, "We got a problem down here." We've got to remember Jimmy Lee Jackson, this World War II veteran, who was beaten to death, shot, because he wanted to get his voting rights. What about Reverend James Reeb, this white pastor out of Boston who left his wife and children, babies, at home because having seen what happened to Jimmy Lee Jackson, his sense of moral outrage compelled him to go to Selma and he was beaten to death. Beaten to death. What about Mrs. Viola Liuzzo, a mother from Detroit, white Italian American woman? She had five children. Her husband was a union rep. She was so outraged and devastated by the beatings that she saw that John Lewis and others had to withstand on that Edmund Pettus Bridge. She said, "I'm going to go to Selma." And make no mistake, everybody, it looks glamorous today. Texas State Representative Ron Reynolds and Attorney Mark Fancher and Dr. Robert Starks, esteemed academic and political scientist and activist. This was high-risk work. You knew that when you went in, you might not come home alive. So many people were killed. So many. My father went down to Selma with his classmates from the University of Chicago, Gary Masoni and David Wallace and a few others. And they were a mixed group. Uncle Gary, Uncle David, white, my father, black. And it was a couple of black people, a couple of white folks. And they had to tuck them, depending upon where they were, they had to get on the floor of the car as they drove from Chicago down to Alabama. And they were hoping they would get back alive, but there were no guarantees, everybody. So whatever it is that we are doing now, just know that voting does matter. It really does make a difference. There's a reason that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and I'm going to ask the lawyer here to explain this to us, and you, Texas State Representative Ron Reynolds, to look at being freed from slavery and gaining our citizenship and gaining our voting rights, why they are tied together. Slaves cannot vote. Non-citizens cannot vote. But once you clear the slave hurdle and the citizenship hurdle, you can vote. That's the logical conclusion. So we need to look back at that struggle and look forward to what's happening now and why it's important that you get involved in the process. You're not going to win every battle. But if you stay in enough battles and win enough of those, you will win the war. But you got to get involved, everybody. But you need to appreciate how it is that we got here. Meet me on Blue Sky, santitajackson.bsky.social. I'm on X at SantitaJ. I'm also streaming there right now, too, and on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. That's right. Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel and Santita Jackson and Friends on Facebook. But let me start with you, Attorney Mark Fancher. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, 1870 to 1965. Why did it take us 95 years to get our voting rights?
Well, because we were never intended to be part of the U.S. project. If you look at the Constitution, the best that it can do is to say that we can be used for purposes of congressional apportionment for white people. They can count us. The owners of enslaved persons could count their property as 3/5 of a person for purposes of apportionment. That's about the best that the Constitution could do for us at the outset, because we were chattel, we were property, we were just here for purposes of providing labor, and that's it. And the participation in the democratic process was reserved for white men with property, an early day oligarchy, an elite group that had lots of money and had property. So, given that we weren't supposed to be part of this, then it's going to take a little while. Dred Scott thought that he could maybe
Mhm.
establish that he had some rights within this country, but he went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court explained to him in great detail. You can read the opinion, Dred Scott versus Sanford, and it talks quite frankly about the fact that Black people were not supposed to be part of the United States. And it doesn't stop there. It goes so far as to say that those who crafted the Declaration of Independence, if they had even dreamed of including Black people as part of it, they would not have had any right to expect the type of respect and esteem that they received as a result of having set out on this path to building a new nation. So it comes as no surprise that it took a while. Uh, African descended people were needed as labor, they were needed as enslaved people until this institution of slavery itself was finally abolished in 1865. And at that point, the 13th Amendment said that slavery, as it had been known to exist in this country, was no longer constitutional. And ultimately, then in the 14th Amendment, they created uh, this concept of birthright citizenship and citizenship for people who were formerly enslaved. And you see that things haven't changed too much, given that the current occupant of the White House would very much like to do away with birthright citizenship. And ultimately, you finally get to uh, saying that Black people can enjoy the franchise. So, it takes a while when you're dealing with a population that has no expectation or should have no expectation that they were contemplated as part of the democratic process or even as part of this country. They were just here as just like livestock to labor and to work and to not receive any of the benefits that this country has promised to other people.
Mm. Texas State Representative Ron Reynolds. Does voting matter? And what is our tie? You and I are going to Selma. And I mean, how do you explain that to your children?
Well, Santita, I certainly am happy to be on the show today, and I'm certainly looking forward to seeing you. And I understand your father, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, will be in
Hmm.
Selma as well to commemorate the 60th anniversary and commemoration of Bloody Sunday and the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Voting, it does matter. It is our most fundamental right that we have as American citizens. It is the bedrock of our democracy. Everything hinges on the right to vote. The right to vote is the franchise. It is so important because it touches on every aspect of our lives. You can't talk about basically anything with economics, you know, jobs, liberties, elections. I mean, government, you name it, criminal justice system, education, healthcare. Everything centers around voting. And so it is so crucial that the American citizens have the right to vote. And that right to vote wasn't always given, as Mark laid out, to people of color. It wasn't. And that's the reason why, me personally, I get chills when I still go to Selma and I still, walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge because I can visualize what they endured when they made, in former Congressman John Lewis's words, good and necessary trouble, knowing that, as you said earlier, Santita, that they could be killed. But voting was worth them dying for, breaking those barriers of Jim Crow, breaking those barriers that once prohibited people who look like us from being able to go vote. As Fannie Lou Hamer said, they were sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so, yes, they made the struggle, the sacrifice. They were given everything, lynched, beaten, killed to get that right to vote that we have today. And so it's so important. And if it wasn't so important, you wouldn't see so many people working so hard to try to take it away. Just like it was so hard to gain for people of color and women, as we celebrate Women's History Month on the heels of Black History Month that we must continue to celebrate. Black history and women's history is American history. But yes, the brutal truth about this country is that Blacks were treated as property. Blacks were treated as cattle and chattel, as Mark articulated. But we've made some strides because of the sacrifice that they made, and people of good conscience joining together after what they witnessed on Bloody Sunday. People of Jewish faith, people of good will that said they wanted to be on the right side of history, that this was un-American, that they came together and we made the sacrifices to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that is under attack today and has been gutted by the U.S. Supreme Court. So yes, it is so important to our foundation and our freedoms and liberties, and it is being peeled back. And that is why I must say this: it is so important that Congress, Santita, the reason why you and I met was because we fled Texas to go to DC, urging Congress to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights and the Freedom to Vote Act. That's why we left Texas to break a quorum, so they couldn't pass those draconian voter suppression laws, what we call Jim Crow 2.0. But many MAGA government officials like Governor Abbott and DeSantis in Florida, and now you see it happen at the federal level, they're rolling back and chipping away those rights that we gained because of the sacrifice. So yes, voting is more important now than ever. And sadly, there are people who are in office now that want to make America great again by implementing DEI policies that erode the progress that we've made, the marginal progress that we've made at chipping away at some of those disparities and the sins of our past. So I am going to continue to fight. I'm rejuvenated and looking forward to going to Selma to be reinvigorated and inspire other people across the country to make more good trouble and push back against these voter suppression attempts that we find ourselves in with the SAVE Act and other things right now that could make it worse and harder to vote.
Well, before I pivot to you, Dr. Starks, I did meet you when you and other progressive legislators were denying the governor a quorum.
That's right.
Which is why you had to leave the state. He threatened you with arrest.
Correct.
You didn't even know if you could leave your hotel because
nope.
The question is, are they going to send marshals? I mean, it's a whole lot. But Mike Burris asked this question. He makes the statement that withholding your vote is a voice. And we heard that in 2024 because there's a lot of frustration out here. I'm not going to vote shame anyone.
Yeah.
There are people, Dr. Starks and Mark Fancher, who lost their entire families in Gaza and the West Bank. I can't. All I can do is give you my support. There are a lot of people who feel betrayed by the process, by parties. I'm trying to. I've got to give you my support. I can't. I don't want people. I don't want to diminish anyone or say that your experience does not matter because that's not right. But you used your vote creatively. Can you speak to that? Because Mike is saying that withholding your vote is a voice, and 900,000 New Yorkers alone, Dr. Starks, in 2024 felt that way, and they purposefully did not vote in the election. Or maybe they withheld their votes from the top of the ticket. Well, no, the data says that they did not vote. That's almost 1 million voters in the state of New York alone. So when you hear someone say that withholding your vote is your voice, that's true. But you withheld your vote. Why? And how is that different than what Mike might be saying? I don't want to. Mike, you continue voting for representation matters. Voting just to be voting is like not having the right to vote at all. Okay, Ron Reynolds.
I
Well,
fundamentally disagree. I respect differences of opinions,
hmm
and that's why we can have civil discourse and debate and dialogue. But I fundamentally disagree with that premise. I agree that withholding for example, we had an economic blackout on Friday, February 28th, where I withheld my funds at those companies that were anti-DEI. I didn't shop at Target. I haven't went back to Target. I didn't go to Walmart. I intentionally didn't do Amazon and Meta, on and on and on. So I withheld my money because I didn't want to spend my resources with folks that were trying to hurt people who look like me. But when you talk about voting, one person is going to emerge as the victor. And if you don't vote, you sit that one out, then instead of hurting a company's bottom line, which you don't have to shop at that company, you can shop at a different company. But there's going to be an outcome of an election that could be decided by your 1 or 2 votes that were withheld that could then put a person in office for the next 2 to 4, some terms 6 years. And then that person could implement policies that could be very detrimental to your very existence. They could withhold resources for economic development. They could be putting voter suppression laws into place. They could be putting more disparities on Black and brown communities within our criminal justice system. So I think it's a bit different when you talk about voting, because that is the bedrock. Again, someone's going to win. And if you don't vote because you were protesting, what happens when that person that is the lesser of the evils, if you want to use that, wins? And now you're stuck with that person, and you could have, with your vote, you could have decided the outcome of that election to someone who would have been at least more aligned with your interests. So I think it's not very wise. I think it's unfortunate that many people have done that, but now we're seeing the fruits of that from President Trump. And I know many people who set this one out, and those votes, one here, one there, they add up in the electoral college in different states that had a small margin of difference between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump or Jill Stein. And now we're stuck with some very horrible executive orders. And I mean, you're talking about some of the most regressive policies that we've seen in our lifetime, and it only keeps getting worse. I mean, what we witnessed with Zelensky was just the latest, but I'm talking about so many federal workers, so many military personnel that were Black and brown that were, quote, DEI hired, but DEI is a proxy for Black and brown or woman. And so, yes, I don't think it's a wise thing to do to withhold a vote out of protest. I do think we should make people accountable before the election. But by all means, if you sit it out, then you're ceding your vote to someone else. That's what they want you to do. We play into their hands when we don't vote, because they want, the reason why they usher in these voter suppression laws, because they want to make it harder for people to vote. Because guess what? Their people are going to go vote. They don't want us to vote because guess what? They want to win elections. So we're playing into their chess game when we refuse to go vote.
Dr. Robert Starks, I know you have a lot to say because you have seen a lot. You're on mute. You've got to unmute. Let me see this. Hold on. Don't touch anything. Don't touch. Gotcha. All right.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for having me on the show. But let me just say to you very clearly that if the right to vote is suppressed, you don't have a democracy. A democracy means the right to vote. Okay. The right to vote and the speech, the free speech, are the two most important complements or of a democracy. And that is why we really don't have, even as we speak today, a complete democracy in this country, because as Representative Reynolds and the attorney have said, there are still people who are suppressing African American voters, and they have gerrymandered states like Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and even to some extent in Texas. Am I right? So
Absolutely.
I have said, and you and I have talked about this, Santita, that possibly one of the reasons why Mr. Trump won was because of the heavy voter suppression in those southern states and the gerrymandering. Can you imagine in a state like Mississippi, where 38 to 39% of the population is black, and you have only one black person in the Congress from Mississippi, and absolutely no statewide elected blacks in the whole state? That's insane. It's been the gerrymandering is so strict in the states like Mississippi and Alabama. It's incredible. You remember Alabama, of course, was forced by the Supreme Court to at least redraw some of the lines in the state of Alabama, but it's still a problem. And I think possibly if you had not had voter suppression and redlining and voter suppression in the South, maybe Our Lady would have won rather than Mr. Trump.
Well, Greg Palast has documented that. I'm going to have him back on.
Please.
Because because I think he's got credible evidence that it was voter suppression,
Of course.
quite frankly. That was certainly one of the big reasons that she is not president today.
Well, it's been estimated that there were at least 45,000 to 100,000 votes that were suppressed in states like Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi.
Well, he puts it in the millions across the country.
Okay.
And in critical areas. And so she would have, according to his research, that he has absolutely been very thorough in accruing. He said she would have won the Electoral College, not just the popular vote.
Exactly.
But then that goes to also the party and messaging. And then also and registering people to vote. Now, in the middle of the Reagan Revolution, I know many of you will say, oh, this was 40 years ago, but no. Reagan was the Trump of that era.
Of course.
Reagan was elected in 1980. You remember this, Mark Fancher. He frightened everybody.
Yes,
He was killed because this was 12 years after Dr. King had been killed. And you had a man who was staunchly anti-civil rights, who had one of his opening campaign events in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where they killed Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney. He was very intentional about campaigning on a pro-white, anti-black, frighteningly racist platform. Now, he did that.
Yep.
But after Reverend ran in 84, in the midterms in 86, they were able to win. He and the Rainbow were able to turn the tide and win back the U.S. Senate because Reverend you're the one who found the data that Reverend has registered more people to vote than anyone in the history of the Republic.
Approximately 6 million people.
At least, and that's in one cycle.
At least, right.
That's in one cycle. So, and he kept on registering people to vote. You got to keep registering people to vote, Representative Reynolds, Attorney Fancher. The work doesn't stop. But let us look at Selma, because many people are looking at this moment, Mark, and they're saying that this is a galvanizing moment. It can be an organizing moment. What do you think? What do you see in this moment, Attorney Fancher?
Yeah, no, I think it's really important to see it as an organizing moment. One of the great frustrations that I've always had is that we have as a people, as a community, become very politically lazy. We have lost sight of what it is that we're really struggling for. When our ancestors were enslaved on the plantation, their only objective was to try and figure out how to be free, how to liberate themselves, and they would do anything that was necessary in order to make that happen. If it meant running away, then that's what they would do. If it meant setting fire to the crops, then that's what they would do. If it meant putting poison in the master's food, that's what they would do. If it meant breaking up the farm equipment, that's what they would do. If it meant running away into the hills and starting a maroon community, that's what they would do. The objective was to be free. And if you get to the point where this period when we're talking about in Selma, the objective was not to just vote. The objective was to be free. So that it's not talked about very much, but there was a little bit of a tension between SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee about the Selma March. SCLC wanted to make sure that it got a lot of publicity, that people came out to the march and all of that. SNCC, on the other hand, said that it's about more than that. It's about organizing. It's about making sure that we've got an infrastructure to ensure political power for the people in Lowndes County and in that region. And so when the march was going forward from Selma to Montgomery, the SNCC workers were sort of going along, but they were taking detours. They were going off into the fields and they were talking to the people. They were educating them about how to register to vote, how to set up, how to run people for office, how to coordinate, how to mobilize, and all of those things. And their objective was not just to get the right to vote and participation. They were looking at how to be free. And what they recognized was that in Lowndes County, where they had a majority Black population, that if they could get control through elections of the political structure and political framework in that county, then they could make a real difference, a material difference in the lives of people. But I think that what we have unfortunately evolved into is a community that has really begun to treat voting as a ritual, and not just voting, but telling people to register to vote and talking about voting as though that is the only way that we have of struggling for our freedom. And that becomes a problem. When we say that we need to get free, we've got these problems and that problem, and the only thing that we say in response to that is, well, we got to vote. Well, we got to register people to vote. That is not being true to our tradition. We've got to look more comprehensively and more holistically at our situation and do whatever it takes in order to be free. Voting might be a part of that. But we can't stop there, because if we know the truth about the electoral process and the electoral system, then it's not a democracy. It is not a system that's set up to ensure that if it's used, that it will bring about the liberation of Black people. In fact, it's just the opposite. It is designed so that if all that we do is participate in the electoral process, we will guarantee that Black people will never be free, because it's set up so that the Democratic Party and the Republican parties always control things and always dominate the politics and the economics of this country. And that the way that it's structured is so that we're not on top, and we will never be as long as that's all that we do. And so we have to think beyond just the confines and the limitations of what we're doing. And it gets to the point that was made about withholding your vote. People sometimes withhold their vote not in order to do something that's politically expedient or to do something that's going to win an election. Many times they do it just because they've got principles and they don't want to compromise their principles. They look at the candidates who are running and they say, both candidates are evil in my view. And as a principled matter, I cannot cast my vote for either one of them. And I will not participate in that process. I think that has to be respected. It may not make sense to someone who's invested in the political process. and who sees things through the prism of winning elections and doing, it doesn't make any sense. I get it. But from someone who is principled and who's got a commitment, it may be a commitment to God and all that he stands for, and they can't in good conscience participate in a process that is going to cause them to compromise their principles, we have to respect that. And I think that that's in the tradition of our ancestors. Because if our ancestors were just politically expedient, if the only thing that they were trying to do was to gain some measure of influence or advantage within the situation that they found themselves, then all of them would have been struggling not to be free and to liberate themselves and to abolish the system of slavery. What they would have been all trying to do is to negotiate their way into positions as house Negroes. They all would have been trying to get into the big house where life was a little bit easier than it is for those who are out there in the fields. That would have been the extent of what they were trying to do. What can I do? What can I say to the master that will help him to believe that I can come up and I'll be safe inside of the big house and I can eat a little bit better, I can dress a little bit better than those field Negroes who are out there. And that would have been the limit of what we did, but they were principled. They knew that the entire institution of slavery was wrong. And so some of them negotiated their way into the big house, but they did it for the purpose of getting in there so that they could listen to what the master was saying, so that they could see things that the master was doing, so that they could feed information to those who were out in the fields, so that they could make better plans about how to burn the big house down. So I'm all for participating in elections and the electoral process when what we're doing by participating is getting ourselves into positions so that we can destroy the system. I'm all for that. I'm a revolutionary. But if all that we're talking about is just trying to put some people into positions in government so that instead of having a white man kick me around, I got Black people doing that, I'm not for that.
And for the record, Reverend wasn't either. I mean, I think Dr. Starks, my family well for more than half a century. I remember we were in San Francisco, State Representative Reynolds in San Francisco at 1984. This was the morning that my father was to deliver his first speech, that historic speech. July 17, 1984. Why do I remember it so well? It was my birthday. My mother walked into the room and their suite was always a working suite. We weren't just resting and reclining in the living room. There were like 3 or 4 secretaries there. People were ordering hamburgers, bringing in buckets of chicken and blah, blah, blah. And we were talking. I remember Dr. Mary Frances Berry and some others were there. Casey Kasem and his wife. Maxine Waters, Shirley Chisholm. We were all just in the room. And my mother came out and she said, flesh and blood didn't reveal this to me. She said, God has been so good to let us live to see this moment. Because as you recall, Dr. Starks, and you would remember this too, Representative Reynolds, you're a little younger than we are. I mean, that's not a bad thing. But the speculation was no one expected Reverend to survive the campaign.
Exactly.
And in fact, that was the specter of his assassination was brought up very early on. The first major piece that was written in Time magazine about him was by Jack White, who's the son of a famed doctor from Howard University. And he became a famed writer himself. And I remember talking to Mr. White because I was a Howard student and he was talking about my experience with me there. And I remember him asking me about just trying to make his way around to our fears. I said, yes, I am. I want my daddy to live. I said, but I know he's got to do what he must do. But I couldn't say any more because I was about to cry. Because the thought of not having it was just, Mark, it was just too much. It was too overwhelming for me. And my mother said, God has let us live to see this moment. She said, but I want you to know, Kenneth, as you say, she said, Black faces in high places, that's not what we're here for. She said, God did not bring us here so that she said, we are to resist the oppressor. We're not to replace him. God did not bring us here to be as wicked as the oppressor. We have to go another way. And if we are denied the nomination, that is okay. Both of my parents said we have made our point. Poverty is now on the table. Palestinians, justice for them, Israeli security, that's on the table. Mandela's on the table.
Black farmers.
Black folks,
Absolutely.
I mean, everybody. Northern Ireland was on the table because we had all the oppressed peoples of the world. We got pictures from everywhere where people were cheering Reverend on. And I think it's important for us to remember that because you have a lot of people, to Mark's point, who have a sense of betrayal. They feel betrayed, and they have been. Because we celebrate being the first and the only, as if we're the only ones who've ever been qualified. You do know Frederick Douglass could have been president of these United States. To get out of here. But that's not the point. If you're going to go there and be an imperialist, I'm not trying to brown up imperialism. I'm not trying to colonize space. These people haven't even figured that out. They want to take this crazy experiment out into the wild blue yonder. Are you nuts? So I think we have to go another way. We have to advance the conversation. Because I can tell you this, I've got nieces and nephews who are not 25. I've talked to these young kids, these young Black activists, these young Jewish activists who are pushing the Palestinian question, quite frankly. They're leading that. And they have told me, the world y'all gave us, I don't want it. Jonah Karsh on my show from If Not Now said, hey, he was listening to everybody. He said, stop, with all due respect, everybody. The world y'all have, I don't want it. I have been on the tour as a young Jewish fellow. I have been on the tour. I'm not going to do this to anyone. When I got there, I said, wait a minute, you all told me the wrong story. I'm not doing this. So, we've got to come up with something else as we talk to people about the vote and voting. You can't just say Reverend Jackson ran so we'd have Obama. No. That's great. My mother said, you got to know the difference between a miracle and a blessing. Jesse Jackson and Dr. King were miracles. He was the blessing. He was what you prayed for. Okay? But that didn't get it. Because you can't win at all costs. And I love Barack, but that ain't got nothing to do with the fact that I need some deliverables now. I lost 40,000 kids out of HBCUs on his watch. That ain't gonna work. I can't do that anymore. I can't have you take out another Gaddafi. I know he regrets it now, but now he's gone. Now you got slavery. You have Black people being traded on slave blocks, auctioned in Libya right now. So we got to come up with something else. The system doesn't work for people. They are laying off. They're going to lay off half of the workforce at Social Security. We're going to be working forever. Forever. And you're not going to be able to go to any of the fast food restaurants because they're automated now. Hello. That's what they're doing. They don't even need cashiers now.
True.
So hey, I'm just saying, as we look at Fannie Lou Hamer, Amelia Boynton, Jimmy Lee Jackson, and James Reeb, and Viola Liuzzo, and so many others, this was not their point. Viola Liuzzo was a white mama who she knew she might not come home to her children. You can't just make this about elevating Black people. This is about bringing the bottom up. Not just getting a first Black, and that's not going to work. And all you have to do, Dr. Starks and Mark Fancher and Representative Reynolds, is talk to the young people. They gonna tell you.
Could I ask Representative Reynolds one question? Why is it that Biden, who had a majority in the House and the Senate in his time as president, why didn't he not put and back the John Lewis Voting Rights Act?
Dr. Starks, that is a great question, and I have challenged President Biden on that very issue. We had the majority in the House and the Senate,
Absolutely.
and we should have done it. The relic of the past and the filibuster, it gave cover to Senator Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema in the Senate to push the filibuster and not do it. I thought that Biden did not lean in heavily enough and use his. He could have done more through executive order, but in order to get the bill passed, he had to lean in. Our former President Lyndon Baines Johnson had to lean in to get the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65. It's great. It's all documented. It wasn't like he was just excited to do it. They pushed him to do it, and he did it. But if he wouldn't have leaned in, he wouldn't have got it done. I didn't see President Biden leaned in sufficiently to do it. Having said that, I just do want to quickly respond to something that Mark said. I get the frustration, and I get it. But, I think we need an inside-outside approach. You need the agitators that are making good trouble, that are marching, that are protesting, that are out there, making it happen, applying the pressure. And you also need to have elected officials that can pass the policies that the agitators are pushing. So you need both. It's not either or, it's both and, because
it's in coordination.
Right. You want to
have to be coordinated, right?
So that you can pass the legislation that ultimately we are fighting so desperately to get. So I want to see that John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed. But what's going to happen? You have to have people that are in office that are willing to sign the law, a president that is willing to, sign it. And so you need a House and the Senate that is willing to do it. So we need people to be there. Elections have major consequences. It matters in state government. Dr. Starks, you talk about gerrymandering. Well, who do you think is doing the gerrymandering? It's state legislators that are doing the gerrymandering. So yeah, it matters who's at the table. When you talk about access to healthcare, it matters who's at the table, because if you don't have people at the table that are aligned with the Elon Musk and the oligarchs, guess what? They're going to cut Medicaid. They're going to cut Social Security. So it matters. It matters to have the agitators, the tree shakers, and the jelly makers. It matters who is in office. So I think it is frustrating sometimes when we have some handkerchief head Negroes in office that are just happy to be there. Only thing about them black is their skin, because they don't advocate for black people. They get the positions to push their own personal agendas, right, and their social agendas, but they're not they're agitating. We need to have people in office that care about the people that they're there to represent. So we don't have a perfect system. There is no perfect system, but we have a system that can theoretically work. And if it doesn't work, then guess what? We need to have people that are voted in to change the system. That's all. Yes, I think it's both and. It's not either or. It's going to take people who are legislators. It's going to take people who are in the pastors, the grassroots, the foot soldiers, the teachers. It takes a village. All of us have a responsibility and a role to play, not just only elected officials, but everybody. That's what I think. It takes a village. All of us have a role to play in order to protect and save our democracy.
Yeah, see, we agree on method. I have no problem with inside and outside. I think that where we may differ is objective. If policies come about as a result of the things that people on the inside do, great. But the objective, from my point of view, is to destroy the system. I think that, thinking that somehow, theoretically, if we use the system, that we will become liberated, that I don't agree with. I think that the system itself is an impediment to our freedom, and it has to go.
But what do we replace it with? What do we replace it with?
Well, we're capable of coming up with something better than this. collectively. I mean, I have my ideas, but I think collectively, people of goodwill could come up with a system that doesn't put the power in the hands of multinational corporations and billionaires, and has elections which are structured in such a way that only people who are backed by those people have even a fighting chance of getting elected. We can come up with something better than that. We can come up with a system that's better than concentrating wealth in the hands of a few. We can come up with a system that places the wealth of the people in the hands of the people and provides for them in a way that nobody is poor and nobody's hungry. We have the resources to do that, and that's where we need to be focused. And I think that if we're guided not by political expediency and the way that people play the political game, and instead are guided by what God wants for his children, we're more likely to achieve what I think is going to result in the satisfaction and happiness of everybody. Uh, in Isaiah, they say that God's ways are not our ways, his thoughts are not our thoughts. And our thoughts are, and you believe me, I would never wish the death of anyone. But I know that there are people who, when those shots were taken at Donald Trump, on some level felt like if that bullet had found its way and was true and it had ended his life, we'd all be better off. And the one thing that I agree with Donald Trump on, and I've said it before, is that he says that God saved his life by having him turn his head at the right time. I agree with that 100%, because we don't process it this way. But I think that what God sees is that if his life had ended then he would have been elevated to the point of sainthood. He would have been a martyr for the MAGA cause. And in the imagination of all of the misguided people who support him, they would have thought that had this man lived, he would have brought salvation and prosperity and redemption to this country. And they would have stayed on track with all of these negative, hateful ideas that he left behind. But instead, what he did is he allowed this man to live. And what we're seeing, as painful as it has been, as disorienting as it has been, as destabilizing as it has been during the last 6 weeks or so of his presidency, he, through the manifestation of his ideas, is putting on full display, even for those who are the hardest to convince that he's a hateful, disgusting, deceitful, stupid man. Now they're able to see the real evidence of it in real time. And people are processing it in a way that they never could have if he had not won the election, if he'd not been allowed to live. And so, as painful as it is, this, I think, is God's way of showing even the people who are hardest to convince that this is not the way to go. That we as a human species are capable of better than this. And the evidence is starting to come in. You're starting to see postings by, hardcore MAGA people that, hey, this guy is not what we thought he was. And if in the end, what happens is that people gain a new perspective, that people gain a new respect for the idea of not hating people, for not being divisive, for seeing all people as part of the human family. If as a result of that, I think we benefit from a Trump presidency. But I think it falls to those of us who are goodwill to make sure that we're positioned and in a place and coming from a perspective that allows us to leverage that into something that is new and better and fairer and more humane.
But Mark, can I ask you one thing? How do we deal with the MAGA group that is really white nationalist Christian nationality? Christian nationalism. I'm sorry.
Well, I just think I think we can stop. Let me just say this: nationalism to me is enough, because there's nothing Christ-like about these people. You've got nationalists of every different religion, and no one cloaks them. No one puts Jesus on them or their saviors on them, and that for me is problematic. I'm just saying.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is the white Christian nationalists believe that God gave them the right to rule the world.
And wait a minute, and so
Okay.
do some some other groups feel that too.
Agreed.
But we
Agreed.
don't. But we don't go in on them. I was just saying that just to say it.
I
Yeah,
understand.
well, let me say this.
Hmm.
One of the shortcomings, in my view, of people who are really into politics
Hmm.
and are focused on the material exclusively is that they believe that they have to solve every problem, that they have the capacity and the ability to solve every problem and to come up with strategies to do that. There are some things that human beings simply cannot do. Some things are strictly within the province of God. And touching the hearts and souls and minds of people is sometimes something that we just can't do. And God has made it quite clear to us that He doesn't expect us to. That all that we're responsible for doing is being the best people we can be, for remaining principled
Oh,
and standing for those things which we know are right and which are consistent with God's will. And the rest of it is in His hands. We don't have to stress about that.
Okay.
I know that that's hard for people who are focused on the material to accept and to believe because I got to do something. I got to do. No, you don't. Because in the same way that everybody tried as hard as they could to defeat Trump, they tried as hard as they could, and they couldn't accomplish it because that was not the way to save this country and to save the people of this country. All
Okay.
that you do if you elect Kamala Harris is kick the can further down the road because the MAGA people remain entrenched and ignorant and misguided and stupid and confused without having the possibility or the opportunity to grow. They just are continually resentful against the Democrats and against the Democratic Party. They don't have the opportunity to grow. God is greater than us. His vision is wider than ours. And he saw that the way for these people to grow is to give them what they want. They want Trump, let them have Trump, and let them experience it for themselves and grow up. As parents, we do that for our children. Our children may beg for candy for dinner, and if they keep begging for candy for dinner, then one day we say, okay, listen, we're going to give you candy for dinner. And then later on tonight, when you've got a tummy ache and you're sick and upset, I'm going to tell you, don't ever ask for that again.
you know what, everybody? I've got about 2 minutes before we have to go, and what a conversation.
Well, let me ask,
Well, no, I got
Representative.
a couple of minutes, but you,
Yeah.
Dr. Starks?
Representative Reynolds, do you see a change or the possibility of a change in 2026 when hopefully the Democrats will have a majority in the House and the Senate or one or the other?
I'm always very honest and transparent. I think that there's a great possibility that we will have a Democrat majority in the House. I think there's going to be a lot of backlash from these terrible draconian policies from President Trump and his co-president Elon Musk. I do think that we'll see a Speaker Hakeem Jeffries. The Senate, I don't believe that the Senate will be switching over to Democrat control, but I do think there will be a lot of backlash in the midterms for the Republican Party.
Okay.
That's coming. Attorney Mark Fancher, your closing thought?
No, I just I think that we need to honor the sacrifices that were made by those in Selma. It was a real high price to pay, and so many sacrifices that we don't even know about. In Marion, Alabama, where my mother was born, where she met my father, um, there was a school that was founded by missionaries called Lincoln School, which had some of the most profound and wonderful teachers and students, brilliant Black students that you've ever seen. That school suffered because those who participated in the demonstrations were the cause of retaliation against that school, and they went in and really dismantled it as a response to the activism. A lot of prices were paid.
Okay.
Dr. Starks?
Yeah, well, I just want to say that again, I repeat, voting and free speech are the backbone, the basis of a democracy. And we don't have that 100% in this country. And until we get that, we will not have a democracy.
Well, you know, as they say in the movement, we who believe in freedom will not rest. Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and
The
tired.
second time, right?
Well, democracy is something that we've never had.
You got that
We
right.
trying to hold on to a republic. I mean, we have democratic elements.
You got
Remember, U.S. Senate was a selected position up until about 100 years ago. It became, and the People's House has always been an elected position.
mhm,
So we need to understand that. We need to understand that, look, the oligarchs run the place. Some that we're shooting at each other instead of looking at the real targets. I don't think you should shoot anybody. But the fact is, it's oligarchs who use both parties and the political actors therein as tools to achieve their goals, which is control. They're
mhm.
the ones who create poverty. Poverty is an artificial construct. My pastor, Reverend Clay Evans, said, I've never seen God make a mouth he could not feed. So you got some greedy people who controlling the process and who are stopping many of us from eating, learning, getting healthy, having decent shelter and clothing. No, 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 no. That's got to stop. MAGA's not our problem. Greed is our problem. Because I've seen people on the left fight free speech. I've seen the Democrats eliminate a primary process and throw out 14 million votes. Yeah, they did that. So at some point, we got a lot, Dr. Starks, Texas State Representative Ron Reynolds, Mark French, we got a lot of cleaning up to do. Because nobody is going to save us.
That's right. There you go.
Reverend Jackson said that. So I'm going to use whoever I need to use to make this thing work.
Right.
And maybe, as Mark says, we need a Trump to wake us up.
And he's doing that.
Well,
Absolutely.
and good. But you know what? you should not use Kamala to go to sleep. Or Obama to go to sleep. We did that.
We did that on Obama. Absolutely.
And we lost a lot of ground.
Yes, we did.
We can't have that.
That's right. That's true.
So
Yeah.
we can't relax. And I'm not talking to Black people only. I'm talking to everybody. Because Black people get it first. Everybody else gets it later. See, now white people are losing their jobs. But we need to also dig down and see what's going on with the finances of the country. There's something's going on, everybody. I can't put my finger on it. But the way they're cutting and moving, something's going on. And we need to look at that. We need to look at that. And I would urge you to look at the whole Oval Office meeting with Zelensky and Trump. Because we got the salacious part that the media and the establishment want us to go in on. And I thought it was very interesting that the president of another country walks into the president of the United States and almost demands money. Well, that's your money and mine. Now, I need to know what's going on. Yeah, I said it. I said that. So look at the whole thing and look at everything yourself so that you don't get secondhand analysis. Stop doing that. And you're right. Rest in peace and power Angie Stone, Gwen McCrae, Chris Jasper, Jerry Butler, Roberta Flack. I will be with her next week with the Roberta Flack family, celebrating her life. But you know,
she was great. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Angie Stone died fighting for her royalties. The record company withheld millions from her. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
Rest in power, Angie Stone. We're going to fight for you while we're here. Love you, everybody. God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you so much.
950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.
All right.
Thank you.